Hello interwebs and welcome to my channel, and for today's video we are going to be talking about a not at all controversial topic within the Star Trek fandom today, and that is the character of now Captain Michael Burnham, the lead character on Star Trek Discovery. And I want to hone in on this video around the conversation that has been happening around this character honestly since her introduction in season 1, the very first episode of Star Trek Discovery, but became even more acute in Star Trek Discovery season 3, both within the show itself and outside of the show by the fandom, namely how we criticize her character, how we talk about her character, and the double standard that is placed on her as a character, not only for her gender, being a woman, but also because she is a black woman. And the reason that I want to have this conversation is because I think we tend to fall into this sort of like idea of how we talk about this character, in that we're like, there are two camps of people criticizing the character. There are people that are like this hyperbolic group that are like, yeah, I hate her because she's a black woman, and I hate black women being at the leads of things, and I'm a racist, sexist jerk. And then there are other people who are fighting back against that, who are seen as like, you are just a racist, sexist jerk, and you need to, not criticize her at all, and you can't talk about her negatively at all, and I don't know why my fist is doing this thing. That's technically how we frame it, like this sort of binary, view on the discourse of this character. And I really think the discussion of sort of framing the discussion of this character in sort of that mindset, I think not only does a disservice to the character and the discussion, but also doesn't really understand the nuance of how this discussion plays out, and how everyone, from, the person who hates the character to people who even like the character a lot and try to praise her, may also be sort of getting mired in, standards that are, because of who she is in her identity. So I want to talk about that and sort of have a nuanced take on the character Michael Burnham. But that being said, before we get into the discussion, it should be fairly obvious that I am not a member of the black community. I am not black. I do not have that experience. And so while I will be discussing these topics, a lot of it is going to be coming from my conversations with people in that community, as well as just sort of my sort of like looking at the topic from a sort of distanced point of view. But I am not here to get offended for anyone in the black community, nor to apologize for anyone who is outside of the black community. It is not for me to tell the black community who to feel offended at, to feel like they can apologize, accept the apology of, anything like that. So that is not my goal. It just means to sit and explain it as how I see it, and how I think many people are sort of missing the mark in terms of this conversation, and how we're all, including myself, need to do better about sort of recognizing our biases within this conversation around this character of Michael Burnham. Also, on top of that, you should not just be listening to me solely on this issue. So I think you should go and listen to many people of color, especially black women, when talking about the character Michael Burnham, and also the character of Beckett Mariner over on Star Trek Lower Decks. And specifically, I want to point you to one article in specific called Michael's Burden by Kennedy Allen, one of the co-hosts of the Women at Warp podcast, and also one of the hosts of the Black Tribbles podcast. Both also excellent podcasts, by the way. But Kennedy's wonderful, wonderful article, I think, is required reading for anyone, really any Trekkie, but anyone specifically who wants to talk about Michael Burnham. I think she did a phenomenal job sort of honing in on these issues, and I'm just sort of playing backup fiddle on these, and I really think that, do not stop this discussion with this video. Please go read her article and expand upon that and find other articles and things from people of color, and I'll have the link down below. So with that being said, I kind of want to jump into this discussion on the character Michael Burnham. With characters like Michael Burnham, and really a lot of black characters, especially within larger franchises that have a history and a larger context, but really any black characters in any sort of fiction and science fiction and nerd and pop culture, we tend to view that argument in sort of two polarized camps. Both people sort of defining each other by these sort of like straw man versions of each other. That there's one camp that's just saying vile, racist, sexist things about characters like Michael Burnham, and Michael Burnham specifically, saying like, I hate her because she's a black woman. But then on the other side, the straw man of the other side is sort of people saying like, oh, you can't criticize Michael Burnham at all. She is perfect in every single way, and there's nothing wrong with her by any means. And I think sort of seeing this discussion in those sort of hyperbolicized straw man-y ways does a disservice to the actual discussion, because so rarely are the problems around characters with Michael Burnham framed in those sort of ways. And honestly, both versions of that argument have a lot of issues with them. Let's go with the more obvious one first. So rarely when people are criticizing a woman of color, a black character like Michael Burnham, and a woman black character, so rarely is it so obvious as to say that, she is a black woman and I hate her. Yes, I am sure there are those people that exist. You can find them on Twitter. You can maybe find their videos sort of railing about a woman of color being the lead of a Star Trek show. No, it should be a white male. It should be a white man. You can find those overt examples, but those are generally the far, far, far extreme cases of that argument, and are not necessarily the core of the audience that criticizes her character. The problem is it's more that she is held to a much higher standard because she is a black woman. What do I mean by that? Well, think about during season 3 of the show Star Trek Discovery. In this season, we see the character of Michael Burnham betray orders to go and rescue her friend, her lover at this point, Book, from slavery. She betrays orders, she betrays her friend, and she goes to rescue him. Then after she rescued Book, she came back to Starfleet, and the Admiral admonished her, and Captain Saru demoted her from being first officer.
As of now, you are relieved of your duty as my number 1. You will restrict yourself to Chief Science Officer duties only.
These are actions that were understandable within the universe and heavily criticizing of the character of Michael Burnham for sort of doing her own thing and not listening to the system of Starfleet and not listening to orders. And in many ways, it is entirely understandable why those actions happened. However, when that happened, I saw a large segment of the fan base reveling in the fact that Michael Burnham was being criticized, that they were extremely, extremely happy to see her brought down a peg. And this has been a recurring trend throughout all of her run on Star Trek, that we've seen the character Michael Burnham sort of go off, do her own thing, betray orders, sort of take things on herself, and either not get comeuppance for it within the show, and the fans being very angry that it's like, how dare she break the chain of command? How dare she not follow orders? How dare she not listen? Or when she is called out on it within the show, people being kind of having a lot of schadenfreude at the fact that she was being put down a peg in many people's minds. Yes, there is something to be said that, like, she is not, especially up until the end of season 3, she was not the captain character, and in many ways did not necessarily fit that she was the person instigating the plot so much when she was not in the position within the show to have that sort of agency. I understand that as being a writing flaw, but it's the schadenfreude that I want to hone in on, because a lot of the actions that Michael Burnham takes are not that dissimilar to decisions that other characters have taken. Like, for example, the example that I used earlier, where Burnham went to go rescue Book, was not dissimilar to what Captain Kirk did in Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. He stole a starship, went up against orders to go and rescue his friend Spock. And yes, when he came back in Star Trek 4, he was demoted, but in many ways, his demotion was played as a celebration of him because he got to become captain of the Enterprise again.
The remaining charge, disobeying orders of a superior officer, is directed solely at Admiral Kirk. I'm sure the Admiral will recognize the necessity of keeping discipline in any chain of command.
I do, sir.
James T. Kirk, it is the judgment of this council that you be reduced in rank to captain, and that as a consequence of your new rank, you be given the duties for which you have repeatedly demonstrated unswerving ability, the command of a starship.
The joy was not in him being talked down, but actually in many ways he was rewarded for that action within the show, and the fans also enjoyed it too. But when Michael Burnham does the same action, she is held to a different standard. Fans are angry at her for making that decision, and fans enjoy the fact that she is being brought down a peg. It's not framed as a good thing within the show, but fans still enjoy the fact that she was put down. Not all fans. And so this is what I mean by a double standard for the character, that she has different standards for her because she is a woman of color. And again, I'm not saying that someone is overtly thinking that. I'm not saying that that someone's like, haha, she's a black woman, so I'm going to give her different standards. But I do believe the fact that she is a black woman means that the standards are raised higher for her, and we are less willing to accept her being, being able to work outside of the system. The royal we don't like it when a black woman works outside of the system as much as we are willing to accept a white man like Kirk working outside of the system, going rogue, as it were. We accept that much more readily as a society. And again, I'm not saying that that is a conscious thought. I would doubt that anyone consciously thinks that. It's more like, you know that like joke of like the nagging woman? It's like if a woman nags you over and over again, regardless of race or whatever, if a woman nags you over and over again, you feel it a little bit more, even if a man was saying the same thing. Just because of where it is coming from, you view it emotionally differently. You view a woman telling you to do something as nagging, as opposed to a man telling you to do the same thing as sort of like an authority. It's a subconscious emotional reaction to something depending on who it is coming from, just based on their identity. The same thing happens to Michael Burnham. Not a conscious thought, but the joy at her being brought down a peg is part of that. And by the way, this is a topic that the show itself, within the context of the show and within the writer's room, presumably, that was being wrestled with. As we saw clearly in season 3 of the show, and little hints and pieces even earlier within the show. As much as we like to think of Star Trek as like a vision of the future of like how the world should be, it is a show written by the time that we are in. And unfortunately, the show is being written in the 21st century, where race and how we frame and discuss and write women of color is a prevalent topic that needs to be discussed. And so you saw a lot in season 3, the writers sort of wrestling back and forth with a lot of their earlier depictions of the character, being heavily critical of Michael Burnham in season 1 for, doing a mutiny against her Captain Georgiou, in order to fight back against the Klingons. She was harshly framed for her mutiny. But in many ways, she was right in that first scene. If she had attacked the Klingons would have backed down and the Klingon War may never have happened. Yes, she may have felt guilty for her mutiny and things like that, but the show was extremely critical of her decision, even though in many ways it was kind of the right one to make in that situation. Again, the show itself kind of failed her as a character by giving her that double standard, by placing her on a higher pedestal and overly shaming for her decisions for working outside of the system. And same thing in season 2, we saw a little bit of work on that front where a lot of characters were, criticizing her, things like that, but maybe have even gone the other direction to be less critical of her, like Captain Pike being less critical and more forgiving of Michael Burnham. And then season 3 kind of having this middle ground where ultimately it was trying to be critical of her, but in the end, sort of recognizing that her working outside of the system was the right thing.
You were the one who wrestled with how to be. What this time requires of us. And he challenged me to do the same.
As Kennedy pointed out in her article that I mentioned earlier, black women are used to having to work outside the system today. The systems in the United States and many other countries, but especially in the United States, are not built to help people of color, are not there to help the black community. There is systemic racism built into police force, into the incarceration system, into the justice system, into the schooling system, and literally any system that we have here in the United States. It is not built to help the black community. In many ways, it is built to harm the black community. And so a character like Michael Burnham being willing to work outside of the system is something that many black women are used to today.
Do we need a mutiny today to prove who we are?
But the character of Vance, promoting her to captain in the season finale of season 3, is in many ways his recognition of the fact that, you're working outside the system was the right thing to do. that the Starfleet way, the system that we had set up, may not have been the best way, and I trust you and your resourcefulness and your tenacity in order to do the right thing regardless of the systems in place, that you are going to be someone who's going to do the right thing.
Not long ago, we were standing right here, and I was staring into you for not doing it the right way. But I'll be damned if your way didn't work, too.
And many people did not like that she was rewarded for her working outside the system. But in many ways, she was, in fact, in every way, she was right. She was right to go and rescue Book. She was right to do the things that she did. She's not a perfect character. She is a responsibility hoarder. We're going to get into that in a second. But she is a character who has the right thing in mind and is, portraying an experience that the Black community has. And so that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about people like overly criticizing the character and holding her to a higher standard. There are people who do that to an nth degree that I have much, much higher problems with, that like hold her to this realistic Gene Roddenberry's vision that never really existed. Like Kirk was never a perfect person, even in the original series. Neither was Picard, Sisko, Janeway, Archer. None of them were perfect people, but we hold Michael Burnham to this higher standard. And I think there are people who do it to the nth degree, but I think all of us do this. Even myself, even people who try my best to not do that. I had a little bit of like schadenfreude at Michael Burnham being brought down because we all have that internalized, double standard based on the identities of people that we see, based on like how we've been told to frame these identities throughout our entire lives. It's something unconscious that all of us do, including myself. So I'm recognizing that. But I did mention briefly that Michael Burnham is a responsibility hoarder within the show. And this gets us to the other flip side of the coin, because we also hold Black women and people of color generally to a higher standard on the other side too, on the positive end too. Because there is this need to sometimes overcorrect for the problems of characters of color being portrayed badly or harshly, or that like that schadenfreude, that double standard, we tend to sometimes write Black characters as paragons of virtue, of perfect people, of trying to take all the responsibility on themselves and not do anything wrong. And Michael Burnham is also, in a weird way, an example of that too. She has a messiah complex. She is many times called out in the show. She takes everything upon herself. She tries to do everything herself, to fix the entire Federation, to save everyone from the Klingon War, to save all life in the galaxy in season 2. And so she's placed on this pedestal and told that like she needs to have all this responsibility to be this perfect person. And in many ways, that is also a really bad thing to do, because it places a high standard on Black women that they need to meet. It's still a higher standard than normal. It's saying they need to be this good or else they are not as good as these other depictions. If people aren't as good as Michael Burnham, then they aren't really that good, are they? And Kennedy, I keep referring to her article, and I definitely think you should read it. So I am recognizing that I am paraphrasing her words, so just recognize that. But she makes a great point that like once the fashionability of, visibility for Black women passes, that higher bar, that higher standard might still be there if we don't write Black women, and any minority community, by the way. This in many ways over applies to the Black community, but a lot of minorities also have this same problem and are dealing with this same issue. And I'll talk about that in the trans context in a second too. They are placed on this higher standard, and then once the visibility goes away, once we have less visibility, more equal visibility, that high standard will remain. And Black people and Black women specifically will be told that they need to achieve this much to be considered like really, really good, the best of the best, worthwhile. And so I think season 3 of Discovery did a very good job of trying to acknowledge her flaws, Michael Burnham's flaws, while also trying to allow her to break the mold of the like other type of double standard that I was talking about. But both are kind of in play with her character. And there's no perfect answer to this, because no one representation of a character can represent an entire community perfectly and well. But those are both elements that the character Michael Burnham is sort of sitting within and wrestling with. And I think the answer is, number one, for the Discovery writers to keep listening to the Black community and sort of what they have to say about the character, as well as showing multitudes of Black characters within Star Trek and other franchises and other sci-fi shows. And I think Star Trek is, in many ways, putting its money where its mouth is. Again, I cannot speak for the Black community on this, but from what I see, from the outside looking in, you see characters like Mariner and Mariner's mother, the captain of why am I blanking, the Cerritos, over on Lower Decks as well. And then you also have characters like Raffi on Star Trek Picard, who, is dealing with drug addiction, but is also very capable, very smart as well. And so for all of those characters too, these same elements are at play. Mariner is held to a higher standard in many ways, but also she's shown to be the most capable person in the entirety of, the context of Lower Decks. She is the most capable person on Lower Decks. And so she does have that Messiah complex too, but then she's also very, very criticized as a character for, kind of not wanting to move up in the world, not wanting to be promoted and things like that. So she has those sort of wrestling tensions as well within her character. And again, I'm not saying that every character is, there's no way to get this perfectly right. There is no character that is going to be 100% perfectly done for all people. It's just a tension that we have to recognize and sort of wrestle with. I hope the writers are wrestling with it, and we as fans need to acknowledge it, acknowledge our biases in how we react to these characters in order to discuss it. I don't think not discussing it is the way to go about this. I'm not condemning anybody in this video. I'm not even condemning certain YouTubers that I have some particular problems with here and there. I'm not the point of this video is not to condemn them, but to say, we as a fandom need to acknowledge this. We need to acknowledge these tensions in our discussions of characters like Michael Burnham and characters of any minority groups. Like I said, this sort of thing kind of also applies to trans people as well. Now, there is not the same historical context for trans people's representation as the historical context for Black representation. There are many parallels between our communities in terms of how we've been represented in film and television and pop culture media. There are many parallels and overlapping things and overlapping ideas, but then it's not a one-to-one. But the same sort of thing applies to trans people as well. I've seen films like A Fantastic Woman, which won the Oscar for Best Foreign Picture a few years ago, which is a movie that holds trans people to a super high pedestal that says you're quite literally a fantastic woman when all that character is doing that movie is just living her life. But then you also have a double standard for trans women or trans people as well for needing, they aren't as good or they have to be the most capable, things like that. You even see that with characters like Adira in Star Trek Discovery. Adira is a non-binary character. They're the most capable character in science on the show, even more so than Stamets. So again, there's these wrestling tensions with any representation of minority groups because minority groups have a lot of historical baggage that is being brought into our representations on certain shows, as well as the lack of a multitude of representations across all of media. There is not a lot of transgender representation in all of media. There are not a lot of lead characters, Black lead characters in Star Trek and in a bunch of other shows. And so, the limited number of these characters means that these issues get heightened and over scrutinized or extra scrutinized. I shouldn't say over scrutinized, extra scrutinized, because they should be extra scrutinized, because we need to be having these conversations. And so ultimately, that's where I kind of want to land here. This isn't a condemnation. This isn't a hating on anybody. It's not absolving anybody either. I'm not saying I'm okay with anybody in certain aspects or certain things like that. But I'm just saying that this is an aspect that we need to wrestle with. And I will leave you with one final story to sort of exemplify how this happens in fandom, even with people who are well-intentioned. There was a discussion that was going on Twitter during the early episodes of Star Trek Discovery Season 3. And I'm not going to name anyone specifically, but there was a member of the Star Trek YouTube community who decided to say that they were going to quit reviewing and discussing Star Trek Discovery online. Which is fine, fair. You don't have to like Star Trek Discovery. That is okay. But when they wrote an essay about why they were quitting the show, one of the main reasons that they decided to quit the show, though, was around the character Michael Burnham and a lot of the issues that I said. That she is someone who is impulsive, that, she's never punished for, she's rewarded for, she's shown to be the best of the best. But this person, named all of these things that, if you described them about Captain Kirk, they would have fit just as aptly for him. But again, I'm not telling you that you have to like the show, and if that's a reason that the show rubs you the wrong way, it's fine. I'm not going to tell you have to like a show. But within that essay, they described Michael Burnham a certain way. And I'm not going to say the word just because, I'd rather err on the side of overcaution than undercaution. But they described Michael Burnham as the blank hero. And the word's right here. It should be right here. And a lot of people balked at the use of this specific word. And not to say that people shouldn't rightly be offended by that word. Again, I'm not here to tell people what and how they should be offended by something, especially members of a community that I am not a part of. But for me, the thing that I sort of took from that was the fact that this person decided to quantify Michael Burnham using a word that talks about her being black. That this person framed their discussion of Michael Burnham around her blackness. That was the biggest qualifier of her as a character. Not that she was a woman even. Not that, she was the lead of the show. No, it was the fact that she was black. And then went on to critique her for all of these things. And so it frames the reason that he has a problem with these things is because of the way he frames her as a black woman. And again, they were all things that if you described Captain Kirk with these descriptors, they would have fit perfectly for him. And so it leads me back to how he frames her as a black woman. And again, I am not here to condemn that person. I certainly take issue with their essay and how they spoke about the show and specifically about Michael Burnham. I have a big issue with it. And also, I should say, I don't believe it was this person's intention to frame their criticism of Michael Burnham around her blackness. I don't think that was their plan. I don't believe that they tried to do that essay with a racist intention in their heart. But they did frame it that way, intentionally or not. Biases and racism is not always conscious. Just because you may perform a racist action does not mean you are a capital R racist, but it does not mean that you get to ignore the fact that you do have racist biases and tendencies, and that they sometimes come out in your actions or critiques or your words. And I say that about all of us, not just about this person. And also, I should say, I'm not here to forgive this person. It is not my place to forgive them. That is for members of the black community to do for themselves individually, and not for anyone else outside of the black community to do for anyone within the community. But I'm not here to condemn this person. I'm just saying this is indicative of the exact reason why these discussions need to be had both within the show and within the fandom. And we need to be having these discussions overtly because it's important. If Star Trek has taught us anything, is that these types of conversations are necessary and are permitted within the framework of the show itself. The show wants us to have these discussions. The show wants us to critique it and tell us where it gets it wrong, where it gets it right, and where we get it right and where we get it wrong. That's what I love about Star Trek. It is not a show that lets you sort of gloss over these issues. It makes us confront them. And so in that spirit, I think we should confront them. And so I leave it open to all of you. Let me know down in the comments below your thoughts on this video. Again, I want to reiterate that I want my comments to be a place of nuanced discussion where we assume positive intent, where we care about each other, and we try to just have an understanding conversation, because I know this can be a very heated topic. So please, please, please come at this from trying to have a productive and constructive conversation about all of this. Beyond that, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. I also have a Patreon as well that you can help me out on. But beyond all of that, I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper. I'm sorry, everybody. That's the note to end this video on. Of course. Thank you so much to all of my patrons who are helping me achieve my dream of doing this full time. And especially a thank you to Catherine Lambeth, Miranda Janelle, Ashley Allen Bokikio, Eli Berg-Moss, Ashlyn Solstice, Michael D., Greg Gillum, Stephen Kleinard, Chamomile T., Ulysses the Pagan, Randy Thompson, Boyd and Mary Beth Earl, Wellington Marcus, Stephen Schuhart, Wayne Twitchell, Roar, Ish the Mad, Dominic Noble, Buttoneer, John Steele, Michael Beam, Jedi Indiana Jones, William Stewart, Gavin Robinson, Nathan Olson, BBD, Amanda Ronye Adanya, The Sir Spence, Jason Knott, Hannah F., Andrew Jorgensen, Maeve, Jasmine, Skylar Gray, Sean Piper, Andrew K., Bree Beecher, Subraxis, Jane Packard and Chloe Dollar, Nathan Steele, Tiffany Danger, Mari Neckar, Wendizzle Bizzle, Bush, W. Randy Eady, Mark the Edge, Piston Twisted Garage, Geek Filter, Gretchen Badger, Polly Mina, Jean Mithun, Sarah Bystam, Lysa, Din, Jacob Tovar, Celestial Dawn, Lily, Andrew Lamoureux, Raina C., Zone 1 Librarian, Michael Hardy, Corey Honkanen, and Vale Dunn. Thank you. You are all beautiful, beautiful people.